pleased to welcome all of you. I'm especially pleased to welcome our guests from outside the university, and most of all, our distinguished panelists. This is the 7th annual Murrow Forum. Each year, the Murrow Forum takes on a different topic. It has a distinguished tradition of convening first-rate panels. Participants in the Murrow Forums have included print, broadcast, and internet journalists, politicians, and commentators. Together, they have brought their unique perspectives to bear on important contemporary topics. Over the past 6 years, we have been fortunate to have held panels headlined by Ted Koppel, Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, Chris Matthews, Katie Court, and Edward R. Murrow's son, Casey Murrow. We think it is both significant and appropriate to hold this event here at Tufts. Our approach is to teach media and journalism within the context of a liberal arts education. And we do so with a lens on active citizenship and public service, both here and abroad. We believe this is critical to preparing the next generation of leaders for a changing world. We believe it is also essential to ensuring intelligent media consumption and inspiring media production. Hosting this forum at Tufts is also appropriate because of Tufts' connection to Edward R. Murrow. His distinguished reporting and analysis of world news and his imaginative leadership of the United States Information Agency set a standard of excellence in the field. The Murrow Center at Tufts was established as a memorial to Edward R. Murrow in 1965. As part of this center, Tufts holds Mr. Murrow's library. We also hold a large collection dating from 1927 to 1965 of his papers, correspondence, drafts, and broadcast copies of news broadcasts. Holding the Murrow Forum at Tufts strengthens the vital connections between the past, present, and future of media and journalism. And I am sure today's discussion will give all of us food for thought as we look ahead to the election season and think about the critical role of the media in politics. Now I am pleased to introduce Julie Dobrow. Dr. Dobrow, who is the director of our program in Communications and Media Studies, will introduce our distinguished speakers. Thank you.
Communications and Media Studies program, along with the Murrow Center at the Fletcher School and the Tisch College of Citizenship and Public Service, are very pleased to be sponsoring this year's Murrow Forum. I'd like to acknowledge some of the special guests who are here with us today. We're pleased to have with us in the audience many colleagues from area universities, members of the press, including our own student television and print reporters. Welcome to Tufts trustees, administration, faculty, and students, and to prospective jumbos and their parents as well. I'd also like to welcome many of you who are visiting with us here today from our neighboring communities. Welcome to campus. And I'm especially pleased to welcome Ed and Janet Murrow's son, Casey Murrow. I'd also like to thank the many people who've worked hard for months to pull this event together, especially the Tufts University, Digital Collections and Archives for all of their help, my partners at the Fletcher School and at Tisch College for their ongoing support, my amazing staff of Communications and Media Studies program, and Neil Shapiro, whose tireless behind-the-scenes efforts in so many ways have helped to shape this event over the years. Let me ask now that everyone in the audience please turn off your cell phones and pagers, and I'd like to point to the fire exits in the back of the room. Edward R. Murrow was among the most renowned figures in the history of American broadcast journalism. His work on radio and television for CBS reshaped the American media landscape. Today, we still look upon Murrow as the standard bearer for much of journalism. His stellar interviewing skills, his sparse eloquence, and his tenacity continue to inspire new legions of journalists in the digital age of reporting. In the Murrow tradition of insightful and incisive interviewing skills, I'm so very pleased to welcome Jonathan Tisch back here today as a participant in this year's Murrow Forum. In last year's Murrow Forum, John was able to elicit from Katie Couric such an array of important professional and personal anecdotes that when he indicated a willingness to do a repeat performance this year, we jumped at the chance. You can read of many of John's professional achievements in the program, but I do want to underscore his interest in and knowledge of media as both a consumer and a practitioner, and also his tremendous commitment to public service. These are all qualities that Ed Murrow himself would have greatly valued and appreciated. In his own day, Ed Murrow never shied away from the difficult story. His career brought him to war zones, to Nazi concentration camps, to scenes of abject Appalachian poverty, and head-to-head against Senator Joseph McCarthy. Murrow was a journalistic trailblazer. He covered things that no one before him had covered, and he reported in ways and from places that no one had ever reported. When the prevailing broadcast technology of the day shifted from radio to television, Murrow adapted to the new medium and demonstrated his versatility anew. In these same ways, Brian Williams has been a journalistic trailblazer. His many accomplishments and some of the many accolades they have received are well documented in your program. But I am especially delighted to welcome Brian to Tufts today, because through his years of fascinating and insightful interviews, reporting, and news analysis, he is furthering efforts to use media in ways that extend the scope and reach of journalism today. This extends a pleasure to introduce someone who is well known to my generation and beyond for his hard-hitting news reporting on MSNBC and NBC, and also to my students for his many appearances where they really get their news on The Daily Show. I'm so honored to have you with us today. Please join me in welcoming John Tisch and Brian Williams.
We promised to get Brian back from nightly news, so I think we have time for one question from the audience.
I didn't know that was coming. That's like longer than my career, I'm sorry.
Brian, welcome to Medford, Somerville, Tufts University. This is Brian's first time on campus, so we are thrilled to have him. Obviously, a very illustrious career, and more to come in the years ahead for Brian. But being here on a college campus really leads to a natural first question. It's been documented quite a bit, Brian, that you never graduated college, that I think 18 credits for 3 schools.
Not to brag.
But it certainly begs the question of a college education. Your career has just blossomed quite beautifully without one. So when you come to a college campus, you've given commencement speeches, how does that make you feel?
Actually, I'm doing the commencement this year at one of the 3 places where I tried and failed to get a college degree, and that's George Washington University. It's a fraught topic. What is emotional for me about my visit today, this is where my mother always wanted me to go. And my father was from Framingham, Mass. My parents met at Bates College up in Lewiston, Maine. And she always said, my family was long on aspiration and short on money. And she always said, don't ever mention how the financing would work. I wish you'd go to Tufts. And, in my existence on the Jersey Shore, I've told people I didn't know what a prep school was until I was old enough to be married. I couldn't have defined for you the Ivy League. It wasn't in our canon. I went from graduation in high school, did what a lot of little kids did, went right into our local community college, which was not the right thing for me, but it was my only financial choice. I didn't do the financing part right. I think I have 18 credits to my name, as John was kind to point out, and I was in $28,000 in student loan debt. unable to qualify for a credit card when I met and begged my wife to marry me. And that was 27 years ago. We'll be married 26 years in June. And I've since put a daughter through Yale, officially achieving the American dream. I have a son still in college. My wife is a proud Duke graduate, and so many other people in my life are hyper-educated. It's not uncommon to be at a gathering in New York and be not only the only college dropout, but the only non-Ivy League graduate at a dinner party or a cocktail gathering. And so I don't recommend it for anyone. But I chose the one occupation where if you can sit down blind on jet lag and in a hostile environment, and you've been flying and traveling for 36 hours, and you sit down at a keyboard and you can write, you're in. And sadly, I appear twice a year at the Columbia J School, and I tell them that, and they look stricken because they just spent so much money for a master's in journalism. But again, it's not a source of great pride. It's probably the number one screw up in my life, and it's fun briefly to give the commencement at these places where I've failed so miserably. I went to the community college, then Catholic University in Washington, and then finished my illustrious academic career at George Washington University with 2 night courses. Before I ran out of money, I had to walk out because the meter had expired. So it was time to get to work and make money.
Brian, you mentioned the cost of college education. Clearly that's something students deal with, parents deal with it. And at NBC, you focus a lot on education. You have Education Nation. How do you come down in terms of wanting to ensure that every student has the opportunity to get a great education versus, sadly, what it costs today?
Oh, it's unbelievable. And I look at the struggles of people in my extended family, my coworkers and friends. It's our family business. My wife hosts a weekly radio show on Bloomberg Radio called Bloomberg EDU with Jane Williams. This is her absolute life obsession and life's work. Where we rank it in the list of things that we need to fix about our country, I don't know. Thankfully, though, we've seen great changes in just the California state system. We've come a long way from the promise of education for all. We want it, as you know, an institution like Tufts, or there's a college over on the Cambridge side that I can't come to me, but I know it's expensive, and Neil Shapiro begged me to put it that way. So I don't know, and saddling oneself with student loan debt, as I did, it just takes so long to get out from under, especially in what at first was a moribund, non-promising, low-paying career, working in a series of newsroom jobs. If I had the answer, I'd have a podium, I guess, today. I don't know.
Jumping into events of the day, let's start with the presidential election. There were 20 debates. You moderated one of them. There were 11 different frontrunners in terms of who the Republican nominee would be. What's going on with the American people? What are they looking for? What did you give them, and what didn't you give them?
I suppose there's nothing, while I may have suppressed a memory or two, I think I moderated 2 debates this cycle. I suppose there's nothing wrong with a robust debate calendar. I suppose it's all upside if we're getting a chance to look at them intimately and take our measure. Our last debate was controversial because I chose, as I did the time before, to take the audience out of the game. And that's the rules during the presidential round, by the way. If you're the moderator of a presidential debate during the general, there's no outbursts allowed from the audience. And I chose to use those rules in our debate. Just because in looking at a previous, I think it was a CNN debate, I sat down and timed. I think they lost 6 minutes of question time to hoop and holler. And it's not always fair because sometimes candidates can fill the gallery with partisans. And you know, a lot of the candidates on the stage didn't like it because they had come to depend on the crowd response. It's as alert as you have to be in my job. It is a high wire, and a mistake, a word used or omitted here or there can change the tenor. I don't mind so much the attacks on me or on us on the news media. Some of that's to be expected from both parties, but live debate moderating, when done well, is an art form. I have my own favorites. I think Jim Lehrer and Tom Brokaw and Glenn Eiffel do a fantastic job. But when done well, you recede into the background and you don't become a story. So we are lucky to live in a time where we have some very good people at it.
Do you think we, as the American public, learn from the debates?
I think so. I think people, if they're willing to watch one or several, I think it can confirm some already held beliefs, certainly, but you can learn a lot. Television is like an MRI, especially HD on about a 50-inch. It can see through to the soul. People make judgments every moment. They only see what you allow them to see. So from that subset, they look into your eyes. They decide if you're a nice guy. They decide if they believe you, if you have credibility, whether you're a moderator or an actress on a soap opera or running for president. They make a judgment. It's the eye of the beholder, the original eye of the beholder industry. I think they're a net gain. I think we can always learn watching someone on their feet. They don't know the question's coming. As a moderator, there's this harrowing moment where I try not to give away who the question's going to. I glance up at the last minute. And when you make eye contact with that candidate, it's a very vulnerable moment. I don't want to get too mushy here, but because they don't know what's coming. They're standing in the batter's box, and you're going to try to paint the corners a little bit. I don't mean to raise baseball at this sensitive time. Yeah, you're coming off the heels of a victory. I mean, so there in the box you're throwing.
Get out of here, Brian. I'm not so popular on the New England area, boy.
So you're throwing there in the batter's box. It's a fascinating relationship, one that sadly few of us really get to experience.
You mentioned the media used as a foil sometimes by the candidates. Newt Gingrich in the South Carolina debate opened up with an attack on the media. How does that make you feel as somebody who's trying to present an even look at the candidates, and here they just jump on it?
Oh, it's red meat. President Obama will do it on some issue or another during the course of the general. It's red meat. We are not in this occupation to get ticker tape parades and win popularity awards. I've seen our popularity ratings. There are animal control officers more highly regarded in their communities than we are, and we still have a vital job to do in a democracy, and sometimes it's going to mean, while people are wildly anticipating the answer, well, someone has to be the vehicle, the vessel to test it, as you well know. And it's not going to win you any popularity contest. So, look, answers that start off with, how dare you? How dare you is the new F8 key anyway. So, most of the emails I get at work begin with that one. And it comes with the territory.
Any sense of how the super PACs are impacting the system? I know that President Obama says that he's not a fan of them, but David Axelrod said you can't, his advisor said you can't play touch football while your competitors play tackle football. Brian, what's your sense of the impact of the super PACs today?
Well, I think the Citizens United decision is still young in terms of how it's affected our politics. I have asked all the people in my life who are very smart on matters regarding the Supreme Court about this decision. And boy, you can see how they got there. And you can see how giving money to a politician easily be defined as your ability, a form of speech. That you should be able to, if you're a person of means or not, express yourself in a given election. Writ large, however, this Supreme Court decision by these 9 justices, and those in the minority seem to know full well, as they saw it, the danger in that decision. You can see the impact this is going to have. I don't know the remedy, absent a constitutional amendment. And in this country where we can't seem to agree on anything, where it's quite common to see an interstate highway project stop at a state border because we can't, how are we ever going to get consensus on something like that? Our land is changing rapidly, and that's one manifestation.
But it's a bit frightening, the amount of money that is being thrown.
That's right. And then, there's a clothier in New York City who used to do radio ads, and I mention him just about everywhere I go, named Cy Sims. And Cy Sims used to say, for those of us who grew up in the New York area listening to radio in our dad's cars, at Sims, an educated consumer is our best customer. And I always thought there was a great simple wisdom. He was trying to sell suits. But there's a great wisdom in that transcends men's clothing. And it's certainly true in my line of work. And I think it's certainly true in politics. An educated consumer is our best customer. And so it all goes back to Cy Sims. I think people are going to have to sort out when they see these ads that are put on this earth just to tear someone down. The watchdog function becomes absolutely critical. I think that's incumbent on us. That's incumbent on brand name sources of news, where people go and say, I saw this ad saying he kills puppies in his spare time. That can't be true. That's part of our role to say it indeed is not true.
Last year Katie was here, we asked her about our first Sarah Palin interviews. Game Change has been on HBO since then. And one of the criticisms of Mitt Romney, who I know you have met and interviewed and led the debates, is that he is not really connecting with the American people. Do you believe that? And if so, do you think that he will try to counter that impression by his choice of a VP candidate?
Well, the VP process for Romney becomes very interesting, and you could stay up all night arguing what your VP choice gets you in American politics. Do people ever vote the undercard on a ticket? I'll leave political judgments to others. I read everything I can get my hands on, and I have been exposed to Mitt and Romney and their children over the course of the campaign thus far. There's never been such a wide dichotomy between his friends and those people who've known him for a long time, and a lot of folks in the Bay State who talk about what he is like to them, and then the media image, and it seems to have confounded some of the folks around him. Sometimes people are just the way they are. Richard Nixon, the famous picture of him walking in black wingtips on a beach in California, I'm afraid that might have captured more of Richard Nixon than he wanted to at the time. And I'm not drawing a parallel here, it's just that, these are serious times. So whether or not the American people are electing a best friend, whether they feel they're electing someone they can hang out with, whether they feel they're electing a steward, a fixer, protector of the economy, that's what we get to argue and fuss and fight and eventually vote about in November.
As we sit here about 5 months out, what becomes the big issue? Oil, jobs, the economy, abortion?
My mother used to say, if you want to give God a good laugh, tell him your plans for tomorrow. And that is to say, you've just listed a fine number of big issues. What a dangerous world we live in. In politics, a week is a year. And so many things could rise up between now and then. I get a kick out of listening to people's predictions. Obama will carry. How do you really know? because we don't know what lies ahead. The anticipatable, obviously oil and gas prices, obviously jobs in the economy. We've still got troops deployed in uniform in very dangerous places, a cause I try to support every chance I get. So those are the anticipatables. It's the unanticipatables that often turn elections.
One of the reasons we have to get back is that you actually write your news report every night, and that says a lot about you as anchor of nightly news. What is your role in that job? What are your responsibilities to yourself, to NBC News, and to the American people?
Our day is structured so that we have our first conversation at 9:30 in the morning. We have kind of the page one meeting at 2:30 in the afternoon. And that's where all bureaus join, and we kind of have to lay out a template. 2:30 puts us 4 hours before airtime. We get correspondents all over the place. Correspondents make what are called offers, and that's a euphemism, and they're trying to get their work onto NBC Nightly News, and they use all kinds of threats and extortion, and that's fine. It's part of the deal, and I did the same thing when I was a correspondent. And we kind of try to figure out. I use a mental focus group of friends, family. My best boss is the woman I mentioned in the half-hour setup reel prior to coming out here. Betty Endicott, my best ever news director, said to me, if you want to make contact with the camera, forget it's a camera and just talk to the guy behind it. Talk to all the people you've ever loved in one room, and talk to them as I am talking to you right now. So I applied that. But to all the folks I know around the country, the various communities around the country, I try to get our news judgment out of New York and into actual America, which begins to the west, round about western Jersey. And we try to put together every night for what I'm still proud to say is the largest single daily audience for news in the United States, our depiction, rendition, in order of what happened today. Assuming you're coming to us, assuming you've chosen us for a reason, assuming you've chosen NBC Nightly News, the brand name, and the people and the family who make it up for a reason. And we try to apply that standard.
Now, there's always the judgment that you and your bosses have to make about in the studio, at the field.
Yeah.
Budgets, time constraints, travel. But Katrina was a pivotal moment for this country, and it certainly was in your career. You won a Peabody for it. How do you make those decisions about sitting behind your desk when you see world events that could change our lives taking place? What's that process like?
Oh boy, it's hard. The great Supreme Court quote from Justice Potter Stewart about a pornography case that is the most used Supreme Court quote in American life. He summed it up by saying, I know it when I see it. On the subject of non-pornography, you know it when you see it. When a Tuscaloosa happens, when a Banda Aceh happens, when a Katrina happens. Katrina is an incredible example of the power of the human mind. I was packing our car, my wife and our 2 children, and we had rented a house near the airport on Block Island, Rhode Island, for our summer vacation for a week. And I was putting bags on top of the station wagon, Clark W. Griswold being my hero. And it was 2 days out from Katrina. I watch few things more than I watch the Weather Channel. I love the Weather Channel. And I knew, intellectually, I knew we had a probable Category 5 hurricane swirling in the Gulf. And yet, cut to me, cargo shorts, t-shirt, driveway, bad sneakers, loading the like we're going somewhere. Like a dog, I had to go through the motions. And then my son comes out the driveway with the portable phone with the dreaded digital printout of the switchboard in New York. 212-664-4444. That has only meant bad things in the life of my family. That's a bad number. They see that number, get into Baton Rouge, and I have one request. I want to be in the Superdome prior to them closing it up, prior to the storm arriving. And we accomplished that goal. It just takes money. We had to load up a plane with water and fuel and generators and camera crews and me and producer, rent a car. I remember driving into New Orleans and looking at the cloud wall like a movie, like they tried to depict in The Perfect Storm. And we got to that dome, and I already saw it was going sideways. I already saw it was going haywire. They were aggressively, members of the National Guard, aggressively patting down citizens who were doing what they were told, showing up at the shelter of last resort. And I asked for the colonel in charge. I said, why are these people have done nothing wrong? They're being treated like a criminals. And he said, we're looking for lighters. You're not allowed to have open flame in the Superdome. So they get patted down. This gets better. Handed an MRE, a meal ready to eat. Each MRE, any veterans here, contains a pack of matches. Thank you very much. But it started there, and it became tragic. We saw people die in that structure, just in the shelter of last resort. Thought the roof was going to come off. The winds hit about 105 over our heads, and things got rapidly sporty and then rapidly deteriorated after a brief moment of joy when we thought the city had escaped. The water hadn't risen. We were just off by a few hours. So that's a long answer to your question, but you know the trips when you have to pull up anchor, no pun intended, and go. And it could happen by the time I get back to New York tonight. It could happen tomorrow. You know that. I'm working with veterans. My news director now, I've known for 20 years, and you just know.
Are there times where you'll be in a meeting and you say, I should be there, and they look at you and say, Brian, it's not in the budget?
Never has that been used. Not once has that been used. I'm really lucky. I'm very lucky. I don't feel a lot of those. No, I don't. I also don't propose, going live a week for the Yarmouth Clam Festival in Maine as much as I love me some Yarmouth Clam Festival. And I intend to do it for this summer with friends of ours. So I know enough as an adult, but no one has said, whoa, we're going to cover this one from New York because of cost.
There's so many hotspots in the world: North Korea, Iran, Afghanistan, issues here at home. And you mentioned that your reporters are always trying to get on air and tell the story that they saw that particular day. Tell us that balance of trying to give your viewers a sense of an ever-changing, scary world, but then you're also very good at balancing it with some positive news, making a difference. So your meetings every day must have to, everybody's fighting for their little piece of your 22 minutes.
Yeah, the Making a Difference segment that John is nice to mention, also a creation of my wife, who just thought that given the doom and gloom, and especially given the downturn in the economy, don't you have a few minutes at the end to point out what people are doing for other people? And look, I openly get away with murder in little short occasions during my newscast. I can write around the 3/4 mark when the viewers are just getting a little tired, and we can sneak around there. I'll do an item that is an elective, a pure elective, the kind of thing you spot on a website or in the newspaper. And I did one, I got about 4 people reacting to it, but it went too quickly beyond most. And there was what was it? It was a school cafeteria in the South, and they were having the worst time with food theft. And they finally set up a camera, and they discovered a squirrel was living in the kitchen. And this was a great story, I don't know if you heard it. And squirrel was living in the kitchen, and I said at the end of it, very quickly before moving on to the next item, the good news, they captured the squirrel. Bad news, those weren't raisins in the rice pudding. my briefcase that contains a complicated set of nuclear codes in case I need to launch an attack from here. My briefcase is backstage in the blue green room, and it has my passport in it, and I'm so proud that my passport has the big 3 stamps, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. Hard to get. I'm very proud of that.
Clearly, comedy is part of who you are. You are a very funny guy. Is that important in today's world? We're being bombarded in so many different ways, 24-hour news cycle, nobody has an attention span anymore. Does comedy help you with the...
Yes.
You're on Loews, you're a fan of yours, you love Johnny Carson, you're on Jimmy Fallon.
Well, these are what I call the extracurriculars, and it takes nice people inviting me. It takes Jimmy Fallon to say, hey, I know what let's do with the anchor of NBC Nightly News. Let's slow jam the news. And again, for those who get it, they get it. For those who don't, they move on. And it takes nice people like Dave Letterman and Carson Daly, Jay Leno, Jon Stewart, Tina Fey to invite me to do things. And I regulate what I do. I turn down a lot of nice invitations, and I try to, I think the viewers in 2012 get it. When you see me doing NBC Nightly News, guess what that is? That's NBC Nightly News. If I appear at 11 or 11:30 with someone else, that's something else. People have been very good, and they've allowed me this elasticity. In the post-9/11 era, NBC Nightly News, night after night, is a pretty serious enterprise. And if you're trying to look and find out who this purveyor is, you're not going to find much evidence because it's more or less a just the facts environment. We don't do a lot of screwing around. We shouldn't. It's our franchise, the oldest broadcast in the building. But in the new era, when I have a chance to have a little fun, I think it's been okay, and I think no one's gotten hurt.
Landscape is shifting, digital media is becoming much more relevant. You're in a fight for viewers every single night. The demographics are changing rapidly. Politico won, or Huffington Post just won a Pulitzer Prize. What does that tell you about the viewers and their ability to get news in so many different ways than they could 10, 15 years ago?
From the green room, I just went to Google News, the New York Times website on my iPhone, just real quick, to make sure the world was still with us. I am that consumer. I will hit 24 websites before I go to sleep tonight. My favorites list has a diverse number from the places where I geek out, the live USGS Geological Survey, where you can see where the Earth is moving at any moment of the day. I tend to be curious. We tend to be a curious lot. I have a great ship tracker website where when I'm on the Jersey Shore in the summer, I want to know what that Maersk container ship is and where it's going. I've got it. I have a great app on my iPhone. I can aim it at planes flying overhead, find out altitude, speed, aircraft type, airline, and destination, city, and where it took off from. That's just being curious. I'm enormous amounts of fun to be around. So, I guess I take it as a tremendous lesson that of all the broadcasts, of all the kids to grow up the way I grew up and watch in black and white these 3 broadcasts on the only 3 channels we've done, and someday have one of those jobs. You'll hear from a lot more important people on this stage during the course of the Murrow series. You'll never hear from anyone who's lived a more fortunate, a luckier American life. And so to be where I am at a time when the burgeoning media may just cause people to come home a bit as they suddenly find themselves looking in the mirror at our demographic. They come home to the known brand name lot of us grew up with. I think maybe that is what has been happening. And we're like a public utility. We'll always be there, especially when things happen, when people need the world explained, as we say in promos. That's a real dynamic.
What about the people that are getting news from the other news anchors, like you, but their names are Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert?
I think that's a supplement. I would be very, very concerned if you're getting your news from John. I get a lot of my news from John. I try to watch every evening. He's fantastic, and I've always said about Jon Stewart, he fills an absolute role in our democracy. He does. They are superb at what they do. They call people out on an equal opportunity basis, and I think it's the best public service use of comedy is what Jon Stewart and his staff do.
Edward R. Murrow, this is the series named after him. He had a variety of shows, See It Now, but then branched out a little bit with person to person with celebrities. Do you consider yourself to follow in the Edward R. Murrow model of not just hard news, but having the chops and the ability to do different things?
This is about the closest I've ever been associated with Edward R. Murrow. I would never dare mention my name and his in the same sentence. Our late great colleague David Bloom, who died after covering the initial invasion in Iraq, I heard it said that he listened all over again to Murrow's recordings from London before leaving on the trip to remind himself what great making it up on the fly, seat-of-the-pants journalism is like. If you're lucky enough to visit London and listen to Murrow's voice as you walk through the cabinet war rooms where Churchill ran the war from an underground location, you get what journalism can do when it's done best. When it's done best the way he did it, it's highly personal. It's just the two of you. You're listening to a person muster all of their God-given talents and resources to describe to you what is happening. You're relying, they're all you have at that moment. That's what David Bloom was for all of our viewers who wanted to know. I was in a different part of Iraq when that sandstorm arrived. We called it Orange Crush. And it was hard for me to describe what it was like to try to exist in sand that made you clutch another soldier you were with because you couldn't see them. And David did that. David described what it was like to be in a mechanized platoon of the 3rd ID Infantry, tip of the spear. And so I'm glad he gave a listen to Ed Murrow before his trip. I think Ed Murrow, as John points out, was a lot of things. If you saw the movie, you heard him say that See It Now had to pay for the big stuff he did. And he was a pragmatist. He did something in switching to the USIA, which Carl Rowan later did, which always gets scrutiny. When a journalist hops over the fence, very hard to hop back. Some journalists have left journalism for government jobs when it has been a spokesperson. A number of White House press secretaries, or especially former print journalists. But it's a big step in the life and career of a journalist. Ed Murrow emerged with not only his reputation intact, but his name as the current gold standard in electronic journalism.
Would you ever run for public office?
Never. When I first went to Washington chasing that unsuccessful college degree, I became like every other kid in Washington. I arrived there and, wow, so many young people wearing khakis walking quickly. And I didn't own any khakis, and I knew I had to make a purchase, but I got a classic case of Potomac fever. It's a fantastic place, and I interned at the White House, which took some doing, being a less than successful student with a shady past, and I was surrounded by these earnest kids who are attracted to Washington. And they really make Washington go, and then they become the next generation. And I thought maybe I would pursue for a while there, when television didn't look real or attainable, I thought I'd be a staff guy. I thought I'd be in the periphery of politics. I've always been interested in policy. But these days, to do what it entails to put your name on a ballot, I can't imagine, though I believe with all my being in the notion of serving our government and giving back for all the things we get from this country.
One question before we get opened up to the audience. For most of her life, Allison Williams was known as Brian Williams' daughter. Still is. And still is. Spoken like a true father. But now you're being known as Allison Williams' father. Girls is doing very well on HBO. Trendsetting. How does that feel?
Well, it feels totally natural if you were around when she was old enough to stand and just started performing. Like, oh my God. My mother was an amateur actress and a vocalist, and the great thing Bill Clinton said about his mother and could be said about mine. She wanted to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. She was just she was a loud Irish Catholic life force from the south side of Chicago, and just all that DNA passed right through our generation into my daughter. We're enormously proud of my daughter. We've known that she was an amoeba, that she was going to be a performer, and we only ask that she wait and get through college and do it right. So she has. We're as proud of our college-age son as we are of our daughter, and it's really something to watch them grow up and get and attain their goals too, because you were around for the entire ride.
One or two questions from the audience? Sir.
As a news anchor who's being watched by
Yeah, please.
Oh.
And there's a microphone right behind you.
Okay. Hello, Mr. Roy. So, as a news anchor who's being watched by millions of Americans every day, do you ever feel pressure to find the right words to use while conveying the news, with the risk of it being, twisted or misinterpreted?
Yes, great question about the pressure to find the right words. I will, when I get in this afternoon, it's like a lot of other companies. I have an office, but we also sit on a rim, and there's about 6 to 8 of us who just end up at the end of the day putting the broadcast together. On the writing I originated, I finished the page and I put a 1 in a box at the top of the page. It becomes a 2, 3, 4, and then an X. When it's an X, it goes into the teleprompter. I write as much as I do because it's very simple. I often just stumble over something that, how could you know how I would write or say something if you're not there? So we have fantastic writers who probably hate me 90% of the time. So my work should never go right to air, unless you're live anchoring a situation. I make mistakes. I made a mistake last week, and someone called me on it. They've been dismissed. But I said, I'm sitting there writing, and it's deadline, and it's 5:30, and I wrote that the plane went through a 4,000-foot vertical dive, and 17 passengers were injured. It was 400. I had an extra 0. Thank God I worked with smart people who had already read everything there was to read that day. That's the thing about the people I work with. You can't surprise them. We're all like that. So, corollарily, when someone writes something in the file, I have at it, and that's fun. But we wait. I am still, tonight in a commercial break, especially since, no offense, and I'm happy to be here, but I'm getting a late start on my day. I will be writing while you listen to all the reasons why you should buy the products that you should buy that are advertised. They're going to help some part of your body. I'll be writing 1 block ahead while we're in the break It's never finished.
I think, sir, back there. Right in front of the camera.
How do you choose between an attractive story and a story that needs to be told, but isn't that attractive?
Well, that's a great question. You open the Globe, open the Times, go to HuffPo. There's a mix. There's always a mix in life. The Economist has stories that aren't slam dunk necessary for that week's social education. Mostly we cover news. Mostly when we don't, we try to have a point to it and not just, here's a basket of puppies. We try to say, here's an extraordinary person who quietly has been volunteering for 30 years. Here's an extraordinary veteran who is having the best time with his new carbon fiber right arm. I serve on the board of the Medal of Honor recipients, and we have a new recipient from Afghanistan who has this thing, shakes your hand, and then he puts his arm on spin, and it just keeps going. And if you know anyone who has served in these dual wars, if you know how they approach their jobs, he just loves it. It's completely immaterial to him that this thing he wears now is not original equipment. He can pick up a penny with his new rubber hand, and he is perfectly happy because he can pick up his dollar. So that story needs to be told, because we've become a nation of people who serve the military and civilians, and the two really don't intersect. So that's an example of an elective. We do some features, we do some, the rice pudding probably didn't need to be in the broadcast that night, but my theory on all things is then you die. So I would defend our mix. Most days, the world around us compels our interest. Tonight, we'll have a piece on the continuing Secret Service story, drama, angst. We'll have reporting from overseas. We'll have domestic. We got a great presidential election cooking along in France. There's no shortage of things to cover.
I think in the back, sir. Yes, sir.
Could you think of a way, and do you think it advisable to more clearly differentiate for the viewing audience the difference between a news show and an entertainment show? A lot of people can't seem to decide which is which.
Well, like what? What have you found confusing?
Thinking of O'Reilly and...
Well, all right. That's kind of news and commentary, isn't it? I mean, 50 yards from my office, we have a network, MSNBC, which in prime time is to and for the left what Fox has been traditionally for the right. During news hours, when covering, I show up on a breaking news story, there's Fox News crew, there's often a colleague of mine from MSNBC, CNN, the other broadcast networks. We're all covering news and no one's slanting anything. There's no right-leaning or left-leaning breaking news. But at night, when the viewership changes and when these independent freestanding businesses have at it, you've got Rachel Maddow, you've got Lawrence O'Donnell, you've got Sean Hannity, you've got Bill O'Reilly. That's what they do. A lot of people have complained that when we get off the air, it's the entertainment, real, the access and extra, and all of those guys that can make for a kind of shocking juxtaposition right up against the back of us. Unless you're a Jeopardy fan, and Alex is always kind of laid back. Because what Alex Trebek has is that ability to make it sound like he knows the answer to all of this. It makes all of us feel about that. No, I'm sorry, that was the 3rd century.
Sir, you got the last question right there.
Yikes. Pressure. Microphone coming down. You already know it's going to be the last question.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say it's really been amazing listening to you today. I'm a freshman journalism student over at And my question to you is, when you are preparing for a one-on-one interview with someone, whether it be President Obama or either an election candidate or just someone, what is just the process that you go through, preparing questions, researching? And has there been one interview which you're most proud of and that you've just found to be one of your favorites?
Oh, wow. It's a great question. I ask, and I'm unabashed about it. I ask my wife, I ask my friends, I ask my colleagues. Great thing about working for a guy I've known for 20 years, I can go down the hall to the boss's office and say, boss, what do you want to hear from fill in the blank? I'm always kind of preparing for my next interview, especially with someone like President Obama. I'm a copious note taker, so the way I will be in a place and Shazam a song and make a note of it and download it that night, I will also hear questions in my head or hear, and I'll get an idea. I'll be talking to someone, I'll read something that'll trigger a thought to generate a story, to ask a question of a newsmaker. I'm afraid it takes that type in my line of work. Hopefully you don't always talk to yourself in public places, but I think it's important. You're my customers. You're my educated consumers, thanks to SciSim. So why would I ever embark on a process that where the questions would be so esoteric, the answers would please only me? In our business, we call it news for the newsroom. It's something we're interested in, and we, for that moment, forget who we're doing this for. And so I spent enough years on the viewer side, and I watch way too much television as it is. I have no problem unhooking, uncoupling myself from what I do for a living. When I'm home off duty, I go back to a viewer. I know what I like, I know the people I trust, I know what I want to hear. I'm pretty good at knowing what makes good television. So I try to use all those kind of North Stars. It got to your last part of your question, it got a little sporty. My first interview with President Bush on Air Force One after Katrina. I was still pretty revved up. It was a very emotional experience. And to be there prior to, during, and then after the storm and see what happened, what we kind of allowed to happen to one of the great American cities. I'm as proud as of the 17 trips our news division made back there after that storm as anything. And I said to President Bush, if that had been Nantucket, if that had been Chicago or Los Angeles, would the response have been the same? And there was, this silence nicely gets what it was like right then. He said, I've been called a lot of things, but I won't be called a racist. And he went on to further answer the question. These were very tough days for the Bush administration as well. They had an ill-fated FEMA adventure. FEMA director, who is now former Director Brown, and it was just a tense and dicey time. And I've had a lot of interviews with a lot of people, and General Petraeus with the doors off of my hawk flying 100 feet over Baghdad. You tend to remember those. And Bono walking around Malawi, and with Gordon Brown, and on and on and on and on and on. It's why I don't watch these things prior to coming out, because it's just, there's nothing that'll get me through tonight and tomorrow night and the next night, because again, if you want to give God a good laugh, tell him your plans. Thank you.
Journalistic. I've been very fortunate in my life. I have a great education from a wonderful institution in New England. great family, 2 Super Bowl rings now.